Welcome to another episode of the Environment in Canada podcast, a podcast about the environment in Canada by Sierra Club Canada. I'm your host, Connor Curtis, Head of Communications at Sierra Club Canada, and today I'm coming to you with another shorter episode. We recently released two fact sheets, one on wind energy and the other one on electric vehicles. We released these with the idea that people would be able to talk to others about what they're hearing and be able to expose some of the misinformation that they're seeing. And of course, it can be helpful to actually hear that in an audio format. So what I thought I'd do today is read to you these two different fact sheets, talk a little bit about wind energy and misinformation and EVs and misinformation and disinformation and where that disinformation is coming from and why we are seeing it so much in Canada. So first, here's some wind power facts. Sierra Magazine has detailed how oil and gas interests and interests connected to the US administration have been spreading disinformation on wind power in order to keep people reliant on oil and gas. Because Canada can go 100% renewable, and renewables create more jobs and offer cheaper energy than oil and gas, we're starting to see the same misinformation here. As an Associated Press fact check, Trump misstates key facts on wind power by Jennifer McDermott pointed out. Onshore wind is one of the cheapest sources of electricity generation, with new wind farms expected to produce electricity around $30 US per megawatt hour. This compares to a new natural gas plant at around $65 per megawatt hour, or a new advanced nuclear reactor which runs over $80, according to estimates from the US Energy Information Administration. There are no known links between large whale deaths and ongoing offshore wind activities, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. An Audubon report found that 2/3 of North American bird species could face extinction due to rising temperatures from the burning of oil and gas, ultimately. The nonprofit said responsible offshore wind development is a clear win for birds, the U.S. economy, and the climate. 90% of wind turbines can be recycled using existing infrastructure, while new strategies and innovative recycling methods will be needed to tackle the rest. But the attack on wind power, and particularly on anybody attempting to show the connection between wind power myths and the oil and gas industry, continues. As the New York Times reported recently, a law firm representing opponents of offshore wind farms is demanding that Brown University retract research that details links between the fossil fuel industry and anti-wind groups. A new publication issued by the Climate Development Lab on Friday maps connections between groups that oppose offshore wind and law firms that represent them, and uses Mozilla Law as a case study. It describes the firm as having a history of advancing anti-environmental lawsuits and significant ties with the fossil fuel industry. So, in other words, not only are groups with ties to oil and gas interests spreading misinformation about renewable energy and wind power in particular, but they are in fact hiring firms connected to oil and gas industry actions in order to attack anybody who attempts to expose that link between anti-wind activism and oil and gas interests. Repeated studies around the world have found no scientific evidence of health impacts from wind power projects. And if you're concerned about wind being generated from ultimately oil and gas in some way, as more renewable power is built, we also gain the increasing ability to build renewables with renewable power rather than power from oil and gas. After all, horse-drawn carts were used in the early 20th century to haul parts to a factory for the first cars, but that didn't stop cars from replacing horse-drawn carts. The same is true of renewables, replacing oil and gas. And the impact of using lubricants in wind turbines is nothing close to or remotely like the devastating pollution caused by burning oil and gas for energy instead. The double standards and hostile approach of the Alberta provincial government, in particular against wind power, have cost Albertans 10.7 gigawatts of clean energy capacity in the 2 years since the province slapped a moratorium on renewable energy and battery storage development. That was enough to meet 109% of its average power demand and 89% of its peak demand. I'm going to link to the page detailing wind power myths below this podcast, but there's also a fact sheet on that page detailing the myths around solar power, which is both reliable and helps lower emissions. For example, golf courses currently take up far more space than solar power in many nations, covering 15 times as much land in Canada, and sowing wildflowers alongside panels would have benefits for farmers who rely on pollinators. Air pollution from fossil fuels kills 5 million people each year globally. Oil and gas corporations and their friends in the US administration have been lying to the public about climate change. Severe heat leading to wildfires like the Jasper wildfire and those in NL have been made many times more likely and more severe because of climate change. And that leads me to something I'm going to talk about with electric vehicles as well. How a lot of the push we're seeing against both wind power and electric vehicles ultimately comes back to one thing. Those oil and gas corporations and their friends in the US administration not wanting Canada to go renewable and to electrify transport. Because the faster we go renewable and create more demand by electrifying transport, the faster we have no further need to rely upon the United States or oil and gas corporations. The sooner oil and gas corporations make less profit, and the sooner we have more independence from the United States. And that leads me to talk about electric vehicles. The simple reality is that gas is inefficient. If you look at the power distribution between an electric vehicle and a gas vehicle, the gas vehicle wastes a lot of that energy. The electric vehicle uses much more, and there's a resource from Yale Climate Connections that goes into this that's linked on our fact page that actually talks about how much energy is wasted in a gas vehicle. Now, public transportation is also a vital way we can lower emissions because it means using less materials, and when it comes to all transportation, we need a shift to a circular economy where materials are reused and recycled as much as possible rather than extracted. But the reason, again, that oil and gas interests don't want Canada to build our own electric vehicles based on a localized supply chain is because EVs are way more efficient than those gas vehicles. Even when powered by electricity from fossil fuels, electric vehicles are still greener, and when powered by renewables, they greatly reduce emissions. Again, Canada could go 100% renewable, and renewables create more jobs and offer cheaper energy than oil and gas. Further, according to fact-checking by The Guardian, the majority of battery materials used in cars are likely to be recycled. Data suggests that after recycling, battery material waste over an electric car's life will be about the size of a football, or 30 kilograms by 2030. Julia Poliskanova, T&E's senior director for vehicles and e-mobility, said by 2030 we will need around 30 million tons of critical minerals for batteries. It's very, very substantial. But if we put this in comparison, we used in 1 year 15 billion tons of fossil fuels. For fossil fuels, the sheer amount of material we need to get out of the ground is bigger and everlasting, Hoekstra said. At least with batteries, you have a chance of making it circular. And again, I'm quoting here from The Guardian. All the data shows that EVs are just much, much less likely to set on fire than their petrol equivalent, said Colin Walker, the head of transport at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit think tank. The many, many fires that you have for petrol or diesel cars just aren't reported. And if you're wondering a little bit about the terminology petrol and diesel cars, these are the terminology for fossil fuel cars in the United Kingdom. In Norway, which has the world's highest proportion of electric vehicle car sales, there are between 4 and 5 times more fires than petrol and diesel cars. Switching to electric vehicles in northern Canada is also entirely achievable. The things you've heard about cold weather making electric vehicles unusable is just not correct. They are affected by weather, but it just isn't to a point at which they are unusable. And switching to electric cars in northern Canada comes with a lot of benefits. So should we prioritize public transit where possible? Certainly. But a lot of the attacks you'll see on electric vehicles are really about keeping people using oil and gas for as long as possible. EVs aren't without impact, but sources advocating for gas vehicles instead clearly don't care about the environment. Continued enforced reliance on oil and gas sets in motion wildfires, floods, heat, and severe storms that put the most vulnerable at risk. Climate change is already claiming lives, filling skies with smoke that harms our health and devastating whole communities. And I want to talk about a different group of people who rarely get discussed in all of this. Now, as you'll know from listening from episodes of this podcast, we're not the type to judge people for individual action. It's about collective action and it's about government policy. So if you can go out there and buy a new electric vehicle or even a second-hand one, good on you. But we do need government policy to ensure that there is some push on the part of auto manufacturers to manufacture more EVs. And this has an impact as well for a group of people who tend to get forgotten about in these policy discussions. I'm talking here about people who fall into that economic category of we buy used cars. And for those of us in that category, again, we're probably not the first people who are thought about by government. But this is why these EV mandates are important. Because while right now it might be difficult in your area to find a second-hand EV or to find one that's affordable, by having government mandates that require more EVs to come onto the market, that also means more second-hand ones down the line sooner rather than later. And for those of us who would like to be able to do that but just can't at the moment, that's really important. Obviously, a second-hand EV comes with a lot of potential benefits, in part because once you have that initial cost down, the actual amount of money you have to pay in for fuel is a lot less than with a gas vehicle, which is potentially very beneficial for people like you and me who aren't going to the lot and buying a new vehicle anytime soon, and who would like to save a little bit of money on our transportation expenses. Again, as I've said before, being sustainable is also being smart. But that doesn't start with individual action. That starts with strong government policies that put in place EV mandates that then allow a lot of us to benefit in that short, medium, and long term. So if you're thinking about buying a brand new car, please consider buying an EV. That helps. But at the same time, understand that supporting government initiatives to support electric vehicle growth in Canada are super important. Thank you for listening, and I hope this has been informative. We also have a guide below that is specifically just about how to talk to other people about climate issues, so please do check that out. Before we end today, just a reminder that you can take action on environmental issues by visiting sierraclub.ca. We have tons of petitions, other actions and events, and regular news updates you can sign up for on the homepage. You can also find Sierra Club Canada on social media, and you can listen to the Environment in Canada podcast on the Harbinger Media Network, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast also airs on CKUT Broadcast Radio in Montreal, 90.3 FM bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe so you get the latest episodes from us.